Hello and welcome to another edition of the Personal Transformation Experience podcast with Maureen and David Brand. Today we talk about turning our messes into messages and transforming traits that we were criticized for into superpowers. And what this episode is really about is parental hypervigilance and what causes it, what issues are associated with that, and how we've been able to execute a transformation around the hypervigilance that we learned as children. So I think, Maureen, you're going to kick this off for us and talk about how you developed hypervigilance.
Well, yeah. So I believe I developed the hypervigilance as a child, coming from a, sort of traumatized childhood. My alcoholic parent, and it caused me to be hyper aware of what was going on in my environment at any given time. So, to make sure I was safe. And I think when your levels of cortisol shoot up in your body as a child and they don't regulate, because normally cortisol goes up in the morning, it's supposed to slow down or like be less as the day goes on.
Right.
Anyway, without getting into too much scientific terms, I just became super careful about what was going on and having to notice everything that was happening in my environment. When my dad was home, what kind of mood he was in, had he been drinking. I know certain times of the day, I had to be careful about my responses, my interactions, if I should just try to make myself invisible, talk as little as possible. I always had to be hyper vigilant as to what mood he was in at any given time, because it just had to, I had to keep myself safe. It was like a survival mechanism.
Yeah, it definitely is. And to prepare for today, I looked up some information from the Cleveland Clinic around what is hypervigilance. And really, there's a good explanation in there. Talks about the amygdala, and you were kind of talking about that. That's the part of the brain that's responsible for managing emotions. But when you're hypervigilant, that area of the brain goes into what's called overdrive. And then the frontal cortex, the part of the brain that actually is responsible for decision making, gets flooded with hormones and emotions that are so intense that they completely knock out all logic or reason. And this is especially true for children who are immersed in unpredictable and chaotic environments. You don't know if your parent's going to be in a good mood or a bad mood. Out of the blue, they seem to seemingly out of the blue become enraged or violent. And then, like you just said, right, you pick up on these clues. You need to know, you need to anticipate the state that your parent is in to keep yourself safe. And that's especially true when you have a parent that's not
right.
alcoholic.
You learn to anticipate needs. You learn to anticipate moods, and you become hypersensitive to everything that's going on around you, because your mind is trying to keep you safe. Your body's trying to keep you safe. So yeah, you become hypersensitive, and then when you develop these traits as you grow, they're usually the traits, like those are the traits that I got made fun of for. I was always overly dramatic, hypersensitive, wearing my heart on my sleeve. I cry, everything was like I was too sensitive. Nobody ever actually validated any of my emotions or my fears. It was just, oh, you're being ridiculous. It was dismissive. Skin. Yeah, just get a thicker skin. You're too sensitive. It's ridiculous. You're ridiculous. And so, I in the beginning, I learned to not trust my gut, because I was like, oh, I'm being too sensitive. I convinced myself, but I didn't know how to not be sensitive. So it was around and around I went. And then, when I had a child, my parenting became criticized a lot.
Yeah.
And, but I don't believe that the times that it was criticized that I had I was overreacting. I don't believe I was. Were there times where, I was a little hypervigilant with my child and trying to keep her safe? Maybe. But I think overall, they're 21 now, 20. She's resilient, she's intelligent, and she hasn't suffered any of the things that hypervigilant parents supposedly suffer from. as a child. So obviously I did a good job. And so in my own defense, I was hypervigilant, but I think I was hypervigilant at the right times.
Why do you think you need to defend yourself? Why? Who challenged you just now? Because you said in my own defense. I was wondering why you felt that you had
Well,
to
because I
defend
was always made the criticism. Like I was
Gotcha.
criticized by people who, people, I won't say who criticized me. They know who they are. But yeah, I was criticized for being hypervigilant, and I don't think that I was.
Yeah, I think feeling the need to defend yourself is part of hypervigilance, I think, right?
It probably is, yeah, and trauma.
Even when somebody maybe is, and I have experienced this, is trying to give you feedback or talk to you about an experience they had. Say I'm a leader, right? And somebody come up to me and say, hey, somebody on your team did this, or this happened, one of your processes didn't go well. Feeling the need to defend myself, that's part of hypervigilance, actually. So it shows up in the workplace too. And for me, my mother was diagnosed with bipolar disorder as a preteen. So if you know much about bipolar disorder, you know that the person's moods can shift over time or very quickly. And so sometimes my mother was, very super excited and loving life and going out partying and drinking quite a bit. And then she would flip and become suicidal. And there were times where she spent weeks in bed. So I never knew what kind of mother I was going to get, or sometimes she would blow up at me. Mm-hmm. Sometimes she would want to laugh and joke around. So her behavior was very unpredictable. And as a result of that, for me, it led to me having fear of being vulnerable and being able to fully trust others. Right. And I have definitely perceived things that other people might say, hey, thanks for that, letting me know about that, to, oh my God, I'm catastrophizing.
Yeah.
My job's going to end. Somebody's going to let me go. They're going to fire me. Or, they think I'm doing a terrible job. I'm a bad boss. Those type of things. And it's interesting because I believe it manifested in my parenting in a different way, was more trying not to rock the boat, trying to play it safe. And there were times where I may have needed to advocate for my children or child, maybe not to the extent you did, but I didn't, because I was just trying to keep the peace or just have everybody, get along. Because I think when I tie back to this, as a child, I tried to fade into the background to avoid being the object of my mother's rages or get in the middle of her arguments with others. Same thing with my father's house. He believed in corporal punishment. So, in that situation, I'd want to I don't want anybody to see me or know I did anything, and I just want to be quiet, right? Because if I speak up or, try and push back, something bad's going to happen to me. So it was a little different, but, I mean, with your child, you had to push really hard because they were a child in the autism spectrum. My oldest, we found later, was diagnosed with autism. And there was a lot of hesitancy for teachers to provide the services that your child needed. Even when they had an IEP, individualized education plan, they still refused to provide the services.
Right.
So that I guess in some way you were prepared for this, but do you ever think that you were over the top or too critical or too protective?
The one thing I will say that was really difficult for me was because I was so close to the source, right? This is my child. It's my baby.
Yeah.
And, I spent my whole life being stifled, being, feeling like I didn't have a voice, feeling like I couldn't stick up for me, being bullied all the time as a child, all through into adulthood, bullied by people I knew. And I had just fucking had it, And so when my daughter was born, I was like, I found courage that I never knew I had. And I was like, you know what? This is not about me. This is about this person, this little person. And I'll be damned if anybody's going to treat her the way I was treated. Especially, and then when I found out she was on the autism spectrum, had dyslexia, ADHD, I was like, oh, no. So yeah, I was a little over the top because I felt I had to be. When you have a child with disabilities, they are not treated well. And I'm not talking about kids. I mean, it's bad enough kids will bully them.
Right.
But parents,
Yeah.
teachers, bus drivers. I mean, it was awful. You know, I had teachers, and I mean, I'm not saying all of them. Finn thankfully had some amazing teachers, but there were the few that just were really bad and did really bad things. And maybe they were, you know, they had their own ideas about it, and they were like, they didn't want to believe they had autism, and, you know, treated her a certain way, and, you know, whatever it was, they didn't get it. So none of these teachers were formally trained to work with a child on the spectrum. And I know that they weren't formally trained because I asked the question. Nobody had formal training. And so I finally did get at one point a BCBA to come in and talk to one of the teachers and give them ideas to help in the environment of the classroom, you know, environmentally, the you know, sensory piece, how to, you know, understand that, you know, when Finn fidgets and can't sit still, it's not because she's not paying attention. It's ADHD, right? And autism. I mean, she look at you in the eye. She's not going to sit there and look at you like all the other kids, because she's not like all the other kids. Yeah. So they had to understand, you know, they felt like he wasn't paying attention, but as soon as they asked her a question, she had the answer. And I know that now, you know, and it also takes processing time. Dyslexia does the same thing. You can't expect a child to answer immediately when you ask them a question. You have to give them time to process it. So that was frustrating for me. And the ignorance was frustrating for me. And so, you know, I was, you know, like I would, of course, the IEP meetings, you know, they always go on the, oh, well, what are you doing at home? And, you know, like attack your parenting. And I was like, I wasn't having any of it. I'm like, no. I'm not parenting her in the school. You're the teachers. You're supposed to keep her safe. She would run. She would run out of the school, off the grounds, and into dangerous situations. Why is she running? Is she afraid? Obviously. Something's making her feel like she's not safe, so she would take off. That's the school. That's on them. They're the ones that you know, she didn't feel safe with. That's why she took off. So we got a one-to-one eventually, but, you know, it was a struggle. It was a challenge. And I had to, you know, through her entire education career, you know, through her secondary education, high school, I had to constantly, you know, advocate for her. But during that time, I did teach her how to advocate for herself. I let her make mistakes and fall and become resilient, because I know she had to learn to tolerate frustration, and she certainly did. Right? As frustrated as I was, she was doubly frustrated. You know, and we learned through that process. I learned too. You know, I learned that there are times I need to back off and let her deal. And she did. It wasn't easy. It's not easy watching your child get frustrated about something. Yeah. But I started learning over time, especially when she got into high school, that I had to, my thing when she moved into high school was, you can't control people, their response, you know, their behavior towards you. You can only control your response. And so we kind of focused on that aspect, that sort of approach, and giving her the words to help advocate for herself, allowing her to talk, and making sure people shut their fucking mouths and listened. I mean, I sound harsh, but, you know, nobody would listen. And I would know that she would come home and tell me, no one's, you know, they're not listening. Like, so I had to, you know, go into the schools and they don't like, you know, obviously teachers didn't, if they were open-minded and was like, oh yeah, you know, we really don't know how to work with this child. So, you know, maybe if you could help us, that would be great. But no, they didn't want to know. They were like, this is the way we're going to do things. I'm like, it's not one size fits all. You know, she's a round peg. You're trying to squish her into a square hole. Doesn't make sense. So yeah, hypervigilant. Absolutely. Were there times that I could have backed off? Maybe. And I think what I was trying to say before, that I would get over emotional. It was close. I had to have advocates because my brain would get hijacked emotionally and I couldn't think clearly and I would get upset.
Right.
Like, and my upset wasn't sadness. It came out in anger and frustration. So to keep me from jumping across the table and strangling people, literally, I had to have an advocate. people that help me and rein me in, because when it's your child, Mama Bear comes out and goes on the attack.
Yeah.
And it's true. And I do still feel like that today. I'm better because leaps and bounds, my child is like, I know that I don't have to protect them as much anymore. They're pretty good with protecting themselves now. So
it's a case where, you leaned in. If you erred on the side of hypervigilance, it was actually beneficial.
Well, that's what I feel. I feel like it was, especially in my situation with her. That's not always the case. And a lot of times I was super mindful that I didn't want the little girl in me to be raising my child. And when she was like 2, I remember seeing the book Parenting from the Inside Out. And I read some of it, not all of it, but I did read some of it. It wasn't an easy read because some of the stories were really triggering, but I got the gist. And I just would constantly think to myself, okay, who's parenting my kid right now? Is that little broken girl inside, or is it myself, like my higher self? Like, so, and I still do that today. Like when I get triggered, I'm mindful. I could feel it. I feel it. I know when I'm being triggered, I could feel it immediately. So that's that awareness. But hypervigilance can keep a child from being resilient. And, what did your research say? You had all this stuff here. But it is true that if you are hypervigilant to the point where you keep your child from taking risks, or you're afraid, you don't let them take risks, or you don't let them make mistakes and fall and get up and dust their pants, then that's a problem. The only time I really stepped in and became super hypervigilant, I feel, was when a parent or an adult was bullying or treating my kid inappropriately, and that's because they're a child, and that's my job. My job is to keep them safe.
Right.
So
you go into defensive mode.
Yeah.
According to Orlando Health, and I'll put the links to this in the notes for the podcast. There was examples of hypervigilance, right? Making repeated efforts to eliminate all struggles,
right?
Helping with and may do their child's work themselves, and blaming others when things go wrong for their child, or not wanting their child to struggle. And I think to some extent, as a parent, wanting to see your child succeed are good intentions, right? But when it gets to a point where you're taking obstacles out of their way, or they're not able to advocate for themselves, that's when it becomes dangerous, when the children aren't resilient and they're not willing to take risks.
Yeah, it doesn't serve the child.
Yeah.
I knew that the one thing I know for sure is all the things that I've gone through has created a resilient person in me, and one that doesn't give up. Like if you tell me no, I will push forward, and I'm like, no, no, you can't tell me no. Like I'm going to do it. Even if I finally realize that I will fail and I fall on my face, I did it myself. Mm-hmm. Like nobody can tell me that I can't do something if I feel like I can. That's not, I won't be like, oh, okay, all right, forget it. No,
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that. And so I push and I push. Did I push too hard sometimes? Maybe, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like I look at my kid now and I'm so proud. I couldn't be prouder. And, is she still struggling? Sure. But she's 20, like you're going to struggle your whole life and you're going to have some really amazing moments, and you're going to struggle some more. But the ability to tolerate that frustration, is huge. I can't tell. And I tell parents all the time, find things that you can do that will frustrate your child a little bit and get them used to tolerating that frustration, because it's like the learning space, right? This is, I think, right out of Dr. Becky Kennedy's playbook, the learning space, the skill and where you are right now. Mm-hmm. That space in between is your frustration place. When you're frustrated, that's a good thing. That means you're learning. Yeah. You're on your way to the skill, and then you master that skill and you go to one that you don't know. Right? I mean, I want to learn the drums. I can't imagine how frustrated I'm going to be, but I'm going to do it on purpose to myself.
But
I mean, I want to learn. The reason why I want to learn is because I feel like I always felt like, oh my God, I could never do that. But that's why I want to learn, because I want to prove to myself, I don't give a shit about anybody else. I want to prove to myself that I can do that. I can coordinate my hands, make my brain work in that way. So it's a challenge, yeah, but I'm always up for a challenge, so I'm okay.
Now, going back about 10, 12 years ago when our kids were smaller, and there was a lot of issues with the interactions. So and our children, our 3 children, are very close in age. They're all within 21 months of each other from an age standpoint. And I know there was a tendency for my kids, because they're siblings, right? And they would do things to each other all the time. It wasn't that they only took things out on your child. They also picked on each other. But there were times when together, especially in gaming situations, they kind of took advantage of the situation and kind of, manipulated things to be against Finn's favor. And then you would intervene and come to Finn's defense in those moments. And what I remember about my kids back then is they felt that you were always trying to defend Finn and stand up for Finn, and they felt like that you and Finn were against them, right? And they felt then, and then they would look at me and go, "Well, you're not sticking up for us, right?" So it's created this situation where it was almost they were trying to divide us too, in the situation as well.
Divide and conquer,
And I think there was definitely opportunities for teaching moments there to teach the kids how to interact, because a lot of things I would say to you is, it really, one is, yes, we have to manage my children's behavior, but also to manage Finn's response, because in the real world, I would argue Finn's going to encounter this with people that aren't my kids. And how is Finn prepared to respond to that? Because you won't always be there to defend him in the moment. Then the other issue is my kids, right? Speaking to them about their behavior and trying to be kinder and more inclusive, which wasn't easy when I had children who were 5 and 7 either.
Right.
It was a very difficult thing.
It was tricky, yeah.
But they felt that you were being hypervigilant and constantly blaming them for doing things, and they had this resentment, right? That we've talked over time. I think my youngest is far beyond this today. But they felt like I wasn't advocating for them. They looked for me to do that. But thinking about how I responded to what happened to me as a child,
right?
It turned me more inward where you were going to be more about defending your child. I was more like, how do I just keep everybody happy and keep the peace here? In fact, I used to say that was my job in the family, to keep the peace. So I found it very interesting as we've been talking about this, that even though we had similar traumatic situations at home, they drove us to respond in very different ways to each other, our kids, and the world.
Right.
For you, it was more about although you said that you're afraid of conflict, I've seen you go headlong into conflict with teachers, with me, with other parents and so forth,
I don't
to protect
like
your
it.
child. Whereas I'm going like, hey, how do we not have a conflict here? Which isn't always the best thing. And I will argue at work, I've been less now about conflict avoidance and more about how do we get things out in the open and get everybody to give open and honest feedback in a way that's constructive and truthful to help everybody get better. And I don't know that I was in that place a year or two ago. I was more like, hey, how do we just all get along, right? But sometimes it's not about getting along.
No.
Sometimes it's about, there's a problem here we've got to solve. So I think I've learned some things from you that if I had to rewind the clock now and how we did some of these things with the kids, on how to, now that I feel more emotionally intelligent, nothing's a perfection here, right?
Right.
Than I was 12, 13 years ago when we first got together with our kids. But, I feel like we've both learned a lot, but it is interesting. You definitely have always had this. We used to argue out in the playground because, if Finn got too high in the monkey bars, you were like, oh my God, Finn's gonna fall off the monkey bar. I gotta run over there just in case he falls down. And I was like, well, whatever. Let my kids fall skin and knee. Then they'll be more careful next time. So I do remember some of those conversations, early on, trying to. It was a little bit of block and tackle with the way that we were managing our children.
The difference was your kids were more agile. Mine wasn't. So I knew her abilities.
I don't know if my oldest, I would say, were agile, but.
No, they both were.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they were. Mine didn't have that kind of ability, that climbing ability. Like she just wasn't, she never was. Like that kind of athletic, And so I knew what my kid was capable of. If she, was like as agile as Jillian, I would have been like, yeah, whatever, but
That's
I
fair.
didn't feel like that was
It's
the
fair.
case.
Yeah. It's fair.
So
And I
that's,
mean to like bring it all the way back to the playground, but
well, I'm just saying,
yeah.
like that's where my head was at. But I mean, would I have had different conversations? Absolutely. The conversation would look much different now.
Yeah, same for me.
I mean, I realize, we all make mistakes as parents, and I realize what I would have liked to have done differently. With when the kids argued, when they fought, I don't like conflict, but when it comes to my child, I don't give a shit. It's not about what I want. It's not about what I like. I will come at you.
Right. But in a blended family, all the kids
All
are
guns
looking
blazing.
to belong. Right.
Right. Exactly. But it was gang up situation, right? It was 2 against 1. And it always was. And it wasn't nice. And I would listen and I would hear it and I would hear it and I would wait and I would wait. And I'm like waiting for it to stop, waiting for, Finn to say, and it didn't happen.
Well, no, because they didn't have the skills.
They didn't have the skills. Well, I was just waiting for Finn. I was just waiting. Yeah. And then I got
Nobody had the skills.
Nobody had the skills. And then I didn't, because you kind of took your role. And I'm like, I can't let this go on.
Right.
You're not going to treat my kid this way. And it was me kind of thinking, making sure my kid knew and everybody else, you don't treat people like this.
Right.
It's not nice.
Right.
Like, that's not playing. That's just being mean and nasty. And I didn't like it. So maybe it did trigger my inner child. But at the same time, I'm like, I'm not going to let this happen. Nobody was there to protect me, ever.
Yeah. I do remember you saying things like, hey, these are the things that happened to me as a kid.
Right.
And I felt like, well, you can't parent from that place. And you said that earlier. You can't parent
Right,
from
you
the place
can't.
of, this is what I was going through.
Right.
You don't know exactly what your child is feeling.
Yeah, well, I mean, she told me,
Yeah.
But
I mean, you can't project your feelings onto your child.
No.
You can't parent from the place you were parented from.
Right.
or
No, you can't.
From your
Agreed.
feelings about how you were parented.
Right. But when she told me, like, I don't like when they come, I wish they could, it was awful. So
Yeah.
I didn't, when she's giving me that feedback, I'm not telling her.
So knowing what we know now,
Yeah, it would have been a different conversation.
Becky, probably good just to kind of put a bow on it in terms of the transformation. And we were kind of talking about how this hypervigilance has helped us, right? And in a way, we've learned a lot, right? In the years, we parent differently today than we did 12 years ago,
Right.
all those things, right? So how do you think, like from your perspective, this has served you and you be able to take the good, right, from the hypervigilance that we learned as
Right.
children, take the good and make it meaningful in your life in
Right.
a positive way.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I'm hypersensitive. Like I'm too sensitive or, overly dramatic, but I
I've
think
never said that about you, have I?
no,
Okay, good.
no, you never have.
Oh, that's good.
But, being too sensitive, comes with gifts. I mean, it does help you navigate your world a little bit better once you realize that the things that you're feeling don't have anything to do with you, right? So it took me a while to like adjust to sensing what other people's moods and their feelings and their emotions and realizing this has nothing to do with me. Right? Once I figured that out, now in my work, because I coach parents with children on the spectrum and the kids as well as they get a little older. And so I'm able to navigate their journey with them in the moment as I'm talking to them, because they're like kind of all over the place. So, and parents too, they're, sometimes they're overwhelmed and, they don't know what to do. They're like ready, like I want to kill my kid, like they get frustrated, but they love their child. So there's a huge conflict and I'm able to sort of meet them where they are at any given time throughout a coaching session.
Yeah.
And it's very helpful to do that. And I have really good insight and great instincts because of what I went through. So the trauma and the mess as a child and all that
has become a message in your life.
has become a message and a skill. I turned it into something really powerful now in my life. And so I use it for good, right? I had a friend of mine tell me all the time, use your powers for good.
No, it's true. It's a great lesson.
It's a great lesson. And so even though I went through all that stuff, I went through it and I learned from it and I evolved into, and I use those skills in my own life now for good. And they help me with what I do. And so I think that's all you can ask for.
No,
right?
that's fantastic.
That's the best thing to do is to use those things that you developed from trauma and to turn it around into something useful in your life.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's great. I hope you enjoyed the podcast today. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to share notes under the video. Visit our Instagram page at Personal Transformation EXP and YouTube at the PTX Podcast. And if you like this episode, please click the like button and subscribe. And let us know what type of content you would like to see in the future, too. These are conversations that we hope can be impactful and help others on their own journey of personal transformation.
Yes, feedback is welcome. So thank you.
Thank you for watching us. Have a great week.